Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. The Seydrin exploration vessel asked Port Meridian for humanity's highest available expertise in fluid architecture, thermal transfer, pressure regulation, and closed-loop environmental circulation. Port Meridian sent me. When I walked into their engineering control room carrying a diagnostic case and half a sandwich, the chief engineer stared at me for several seconds before asking, "You are the engineer?" "No," I said, "I'm the plumber." There was a silence. It was not an awkward human silence. It was a Seydrin silence, which was worse because they were very still people to begin with. Chief Systems Architect Varel stood nearly 2 meters tall, narrow through the shoulders, with long, segmented fingers and a face built for dignified disappointment. His skin had a faint blue-gray cast under the engineering lights. His uniform was charcoal with silver thread at the collar. He looked at the pressure gauge clipped to my belt, then at my coveralls, then back at my face. "Did your administration misunderstand our request?" I took another bite of my sandwich. Nope. Behind Thesk, a wall display showed the quiet geometries fault tree, thermal loop variance, environmental reclamation imbalance, pressure compensation beyond nominal, condensate recovery deficiency. Sanitation circulation alarms, 3 non-critical systems offline, 4 more degrading. A yellow warning strip along the bottom estimated stable life support margin at 3 hours, 47 minutes. I pointed at the display. "You asked for somebody who understands pressure, flow, heat, drains, valves, cross-connections, blockages, and what people do to pipes when they're desperate." Thesk said nothing. "That's us." From a side console, the ship's medical officer made a sound I later learned was the Seydrin equivalent of suppressing a laugh. Thesk looked at her. She became very interested in her screen. I finished the sandwich, folded the wrapper, put it in my pocket, and said, "Show me where the water is." Thesk blinked. "All system volume is accounted for." "That wasn't my question." He led me to the primary diagnostic table. The quiet geometry was a beautiful ship. I do not mean beautiful in the human way where somebody polishes a corridor and hides the maintenance panel behind a decorative wall because apparently pipes make diplomats nervous. I mean beautifully engineered. The Seydrin liked systems that corrected themselves before the user knew anything was wrong. Their environmental network was a mesh of thermal reclamation lines, condensate recovery channels, filtration membranes, active pressure regulators, and fluid processors that adjusted flow continuously. Under normal operation, I would have traded several pieces of human habitat equipment for their balancing system, and then lied to procurement about where I got it. Thesk expanded the fluid diagram. Total volume loss is less than 0.01%. Fine. Therefore, there is no meaningful leak. Probably. He looked offended by the word. Pressure variance has increased by 11% in the secondary thermal return. Transfer efficiency has fallen. Condensate retention is high in habitat sectors 4 and 6. The sanitation reclamation system has generated intermittent contamination alerts, but all samples remain within tolerance. Which floor is wet? Thesk paused. There are no floors presently wet. Then where is the water? The vessel is closed loop. I understand conservation. I'm asking where the water is that isn't where your sensors think it is. It is all where the sensors think it is. Then why did you call me? The medical officer made that suppressed sound again. Thesk turned his head slowly toward her. She lifted both hands. "My name is Ilyeth Sar," she told me. "I am beginning to understand why humanity sent you." "Give it time." Thesk's expression suggested he had already given it too much. I pointed toward the hull schematic. "Walk me through the real system." "I just did." "No, you showed me the diagram." He stared. "The system corresponds to the diagram." "Sure. It does." "Thesk." "Yes." "Where's the pump?" That got me out of engineering control. Which floor is wet? The quiet geometry's maintenance corridors were not designed for humans. That became clear after the 3rd service ladder. Seydrin hips seemed to rotate differently from ours, which allowed them to descend narrow vertical spaces while maintaining a dignity I personally lost immediately. Thesk moved ahead of me. I followed with my diagnostic bag hitting every third rung. "You have no lift?" I asked, "for a 17-meter descent." "Yes. That would be inefficient. It would be comfortable. The passage is for maintenance personnel." "Exactly." He glanced down. I said, "This is already becoming philosophical." The secondary thermal return ran along the ship's inner structural spine. The pipe was not actually a pipe in the earth plumbing sense. It was a ceramic metal composite conduit with distributed thermal sensors embedded into the outer wall and a magnetic flow interface instead of conventional pump coupling. It still carried liquid. It still moved heat. It still had pressure. People get hypnotized by materials, but function is function. I put my palm against the conduit. Thesk said, "The surface temperature is available on your display." "I know." "Then why are you touching it?" "Because the display says 31. "Yes. This section isn't 31. He checked 31.2 degrees. I moved my hand 6 centimeters farther. "Here." Same reported temperature. Actual surface was colder. It was not dramatic, but it was enough. I took out a contact probe, 28.9. Thesk's eyes narrowed. He pulled the raw sensor feed. The embedded sensors were compensating across the section and averaging the local gradient. Useful under normal conditions, annoying now. We kept walking. A little farther down, the line warmed sharply. I crouched, listened. Thesk looked at me. "What are you doing?" "Listening." "To what?" "Whatever your computer already decided wasn't important." There it was, a faint pulse. It was not a bang, and it was not even what I would call classic water hammer. It was more like a pressure wave arriving late. I had heard versions of it in high-rise heating loops where a balancing valve was misbehaving, in boiler rooms where sediment narrowed a line, and once in an orbital hotel whose original contractor deserved to be tried before an international court. I put 2 fingers on the conduit. Pulse. Pause. Pulse. "What is that?" Thesk asked. "Water hammer's quieter cousin. Flow is laminar." "Usually." "It is automatically damped." "Usually." He stared at me. I smiled. "That word is going to bother you all day." We reached the self-balancing circulation pump. It was beautiful, no exposed shaft, no grease points, no mechanical control panel. A sealed magnetic drive with automated differential pressure control and enough internal diagnostics to embarrass half the municipal pump stations I had worked on early in my career. I asked Thesk to pull the last 90 days. Pressure upstream had climbed slowly. Pump demand had increased. Flow remained nominal. Thesk looked at the trend. "The pump compensated correctly." "Yes." "Then this is not evidence of a pump fault." "I didn't say the pump was broken." "You implied it." "No, your machine is being helpful." Thesk nodded, "Yes." "That's the problem." He looked at me. I pointed at the graph. The pump is pushing harder to keep the same amount moving, which means something downstream is getting harder to push through. The compensator would flag a restriction. "At what threshold?" He opened the setting. We both looked. The threshold was based on loss of output. Flow had not dropped enough because the pump kept increasing pressure. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was keeping the ship comfortable while hiding the reason it had to work harder. Thesk stopped speaking for about 10 seconds. Then he recalculated using differential pressure rather than delivered flow. A restriction appeared on the model. It was narrow, progressive, and real. He looked at me differently. He was not impressed yet, but he was interested. That was better than impressed. "An obstruction," he said, "partial. The conduit is sterile." Then we get to find out what sterile means on a ship that called a plumber. "Your machine is helping." The obstruction sat at a high-temperature junction where the secondary thermal return crossed a reclamation exchange manifold. Thesk wanted to image it first. That was a good decision. The Seydrin had a field scanner that could resolve density changes through the conduit wall without cutting anything. I wanted one immediately. The scan showed a rough internal narrowing. Thesk stared at it. "That material should not exist." "That is generally what people say right before they pay me." Ilieth joined us with a sample kit. They pulled trace material through a nearby sensor port. Alien lab analysis took 11 minutes. I spent those 11 minutes checking the time. My niece's recital started in a little under 2 hours. I had promised. Again. Her name was Tessa. and she was 13 and currently obsessed with clarinet in the way only a 13-year-old can be obsessed with an instrument everybody else in the family had quietly agreed sounded like a goose arguing with a screen door. I had missed her last two performances. The first because a hotel ring main valve cracked. The second because somebody on Port Meridian decided cooking oil belonged in a greywater recycler. I had sworn the third one would be different. Thesk noticed me checking my wrist display. "Are you required elsewhere?" "My niece has a recital." "What function does she perform?" "Clarinet." "I do not know that term." "Musical instrument." He gave a polite nod. Ilieth returned. "The deposit is composite." She displayed the analysis: mineral salts, silicate compounds, organic structure, biofilm. Thesk's head lifted. "Impossible." "Strong word," I said. "Our sanitation and environmental systems are sterilized continuously." Ilieth expanded the biological profile. "The organisms are not Seydrin." Thesk went very still. I looked at the pattern, then at her. "Human." "Yes." "Well." Thesk turned toward me. I held up one hand. "Before you start deporting the plumber, what organism?" "Common environmental bacterial consortium," Ilieth said. "Non-pathogenic, present in certified human exchange water at allowable concentrations." "Meaning our water pass standards." "Yes." Thesk looked less offended. Not happy, less offended. The quiet geometry had taken emergency water from a human logistics vessel 8 months earlier. Perfectly safe by both species' exchange standards. Then the quiet geometry spent 9 months surveying a mineral-rich moon. A microscopic defect in one reclamation membrane had allowed trace mineral ions into a thermal branch. The minerals precipitated at the hot junction. The human microbes found the surface, biofilm, hard composite deposit, nothing any one system had been designed to produce. Alien minerals, human bacteria, Seydrin automation. Everybody contributed. I liked that better. Crisis is easier when nobody has time to become morally theatrical. Thesk said, "We will replace the junction module." "How long?" "Approximately 6 hours." I pointed at the life support estimate on my wrist. 3 hours, 19 minutes. He looked at it. "Then we increase environmental rationing." "How much does that buy?" "Potentially 48 minutes." "Not enough. We cannot remove the obstruction without removing the conduit section." "Do you have a cleanout?" Thesk looked at me. "A what?" "Access point for clearing accumulated solids." "There are no accumulated solids." I pointed at the scan. "There is currently a geological feature living in your pipe. The system was designed to prevent accumulation." "Right." I looked around the service bay. There was no cleanout, no removable spool, and no mechanical access except the sensor ports. "Well," I said, "somebody had faith." Thesk's expression tightened. "The design has operated without this failure for 63 standard years." "That's excellent." "You make it sound foolish." "No, I make it sound 63 years old." He folded his arms. "You believe your systems are designed to fail." "I believe every pipe eventually meets a reality the drawing didn't." That is an extraordinarily pessimistic design philosophy. Maintenance is applied pessimism. Ilieth laughed outright this time. Thesk ignored both of us. Then he said, "What do you propose?" That was the first time he asked. Somebody had faith. We could not remove the junction. We could reach it through a sensor housing upstream and a sampling port downstream. The access was tiny and not designed for cleaning, but it was enough. Thesk's people fabricated a temporary capture chamber that could attach to the downstream port. I asked for transparent material. He asked why. "So I can see what comes out." "The sensors can identify discharge." "I like eyes." "That is not a technical statement." "No, it's a preference." We isolated the branch. That cost environmental cooling in one small crew sector. Captain Oriental authorized the loss immediately. He arrived in engineering during setup. He was broader than Thesk, older, with 2 pale scars along one side of his jaw. No unnecessary ceremony. "What is the probability of restoring flow?" he asked. Thesk started giving him a range. I said, "Good if the deposit breaks where I think it will, bad if it doesn't." Oren looked at me. "That is not the language of probability." I can give you a number if it makes you feel better. Would it be more accurate? No. Then do not. I liked him. We rigged the backflush. Alien fabrication gave us pressure control precise enough to make me jealous. My contribution was the sequence. Do not hit the deposit with maximum reverse pressure. That risks breaking it into a plug and jamming the narrower branch farther upstream. First heat the junction, then drop pressure downstream, then pulse reverse flow in short intervals. Let the composite fracture in layers, capture debris, check pressure recovery after each pulse. Thesk modeled the transient loads, adjusted my timings. I changed 2 of his limits because he had optimized for conduit stress and forgotten debris movement. He changed one of mine because I had underestimated the membrane's thermal sensitivity. That was when we stopped being plumber and alien engineer and started being 2 people trying not to lose a ship. The first pulse did nothing. The second changed pressure by less than 1%. Thesk glanced at me. Your method is unsuccessful. Your species gives up very efficiently. I stated an observation. Observe longer. Third pulse, something rattled. The transparent capture chamber filled with dark mineral fragments. Flow jumped. Thesk moved instantly. Pressure rise upstream. Hold it. Transfer is recovering. Hold. Rena. Hold. The pump stabilized. Temperature equalized. Environmental margin climbed. 3 hours 29. Then 3 hours 41 minutes. Then 4 hours 12 minutes. Ilieth exhaled. Captain Oren said, continue. We cleared the rest. The deposit came away in layered fragments exactly the way old scale sometimes does in terrestrial hot water systems, except this looked like polished black stone threaded through with amber organic film. I should have been relieved. I was for about 30 seconds. Then an alarm hit, not from the cleaned branch, 3 decks away. Thesk turned to the display. A secondary manifold pressure spike. Then another. I felt the conduit under my hand jump. Close downstream isolation. Thesk already had. Pressure is equalizing through sanitation recovery. It shouldn't. No. A new line lit on the schematic. Warm reclamation fluid was moving into a thermal branch. I stared. The blockage we cleared had been restricting more than flow. It had been holding back a pressure imbalance. Our success had just removed the accidental dam. Thesk looked at me. I looked back. Well, I said. He frowned. That word is not reassuring. It isn't supposed to be. Applied pessimism. The quiet geometry did not have one fluid network. It had several: potable reclamation, environmental cooling, sanitation processing, electronics thermal transfer, propulsion support. Under normal operation, they were separated by active membrane valves and heat recovery interfaces. The clever part was that waste heat from one system could be reused elsewhere. The dangerous part was that the clever systems all knew each other. One membrane valve had spent months taking more differential pressure than it was designed for. Not enough to fail, enough to deform. When we cleared the blockage, pressure equalized too quickly. The membrane flexed. A cross-connection opened, not sewage into drinking water, nothing that dramatic or stupid. Warm sanitation reclamation fluid was migrating toward a thermal recovery branch. Ilieth ran contamination projections. For Seydrin crew, immediate toxicity remains low, she said. For 2 of our associated species in Habitat 4, trace exposure becomes significant within 90 minutes if sterilization load continues rising. Captain Oren cut propulsion output to reduce electronics cooling demand. That bought us thermal capacity, cost us departure capability. Success changed the board again. Thesk pulled up the cross-connection map. We isolate the membrane. He issued the command. 2 other branches opened automatically. I watched them light. Why did those open? Load balance. Close them. If I close them, Habitat 6 exceeds thermal tolerance. Then what happens if we close this one? We reroute through tertiary recovery. And what opens when you do that? Thesk stopped. I pointed. Where does it go when it goes wrong? His eyes moved over the schematic. He started tracing dependencies, not design flow. Failure flow. If branch A closed, branch C compensated. C increased pressure on D. D opened a bypass into FF had already been running above nominal for 16 days. We found another, then another. Thesk's posture changed. The quiet geometry had been fixing itself for months. One pump compensated for a restriction. A thermal branch rerouted around reduced efficiency. A sanitation processor increased circulation to keep quality stable. A pressure regulator relaxed tolerance to prevent alarm cascades. Each adaptation made sense locally. Together, they had turned the ship into something nobody had designed. I said it before deciding whether I should. You don't have one plumbing problem. You have 12 temporary fixes pretending they're a design. Thesk looked personally wounded. This vessel has no temporary repairs. Your computer made them. They are adaptive control states. That is an expensive phrase for temporary fix. His mouth tightened, then he pulled the full adaptation history. 27 minutes later, he came back. There are 14. I smiled. He looked offended again. Do not. I said 12. You were wronged. By 2, I can live with it. He did not smile. Not yet, but I saw the possibility. The gauge tells you what it is. Resetting the quiet geometry to factory configuration would have solved the mess if the ship were sitting empty in a yard. It was not. 912 living beings occupied the vessel. Several environmental bands, 2 species with narrow humidity tolerance, 1 species that required elevated ambient pressure, medical sterilization, food preservation, reactor support, navigation electronics. The automated temporary fixes were now carrying real load. Turn them all off at once and the ship did not become clean. It became dead. So we mapped the current configuration, not the diagram, the ship. I called Port Meridian. My deputy answered with, "Tell me you're not still on the alien ship." I'm still on the alien ship. You owe me 20 credits. For what? You said you'd be back before Tessa's recital. I still might. He laughed. His name was Devlin, and he had spent 9 years trying to turn my optimism about leaving work on time into a reliable income stream. I need portable pressure test kits, 3 service pumps, flexible high-temp hose, contamination filters, and every universal adapter set we own. For what size? Yes. A pause. Oh good, one of those. And pull the maintenance logs from Dock 7, exchange water 8 months ago. Already did. That was why I liked my crew. You should not have to tell good maintenance people which obvious question comes next. Also, I said, the ship has no cleanouts. Long silence. Then Devlin said, be polite. I am being polite. Did they hide the shutoffs too? I looked at Thesk. Thesk had heard the translation. I dislike your colleague. That means he likes you. Port Meridian sent equipment. Nothing fit. Of course it didn't. Human service couplings were standardized across 26 major habitat manufacturers. The Seydrin used a completely different geometry. Thesk designed adapters. His first version was flawless, smooth, beautiful, impossible to grip with a wrench once installed. I handed it back. No. The tolerances are correct. No flats. Flats. Somewhere for a tool to hold it. The adapter locks rotationally. What if it doesn't want to unlock when hot? It will. I stared, he stared. I said somebody had faith. Thesk made a low sound. I later learned that was the first time he laughed. Barely. He redesigned the adapters with opposing wrench flats. Now it's civilized. I do not believe that word means what you think. It means I can remove it when everything goes badly. That is not civilization. It is where civilization starts. We installed the test rig. Then I proposed something Thesk hated. We were going to make the system misbehave on purpose, not enough to break it, enough to expose hidden compensations. A quiet pipe can lie to you, I told him. A pipe cannot lie. You're going to have a difficult time in maintenance. We closed one branch 10%. Pressure dipped. A sanitation bypass opened. There, hidden dependency, another test. Thermal return changed. An electronics cooling valve compensated, another. Humidity reclamation increased because a condensate processor saw a false deficit. By the end of 40 minutes, Thesk was no longer watching the central schematic. He was calling numbers from physical gauges. Pressure before valve, pressure after, temperature, flow. What changed when somebody touched something? At one point, a junior Seydrin engineer started explaining that the continuously updated schematic showed nominal circulation. Thesk interrupted. The drawing tells you what it was supposed to be. The gauge tells you what it is. I looked at him. He ignored me. Good recreational plumbing. We got 12 minutes of stability. I used 8 to eat the rest of the sandwich. It had not improved. Thesk watched me suspiciously. What is contained within that? Turkey, cheese, mustard. Regret. What is mustard? Fermented condiment. Ilieth took a small sample. Thesk stared at her. You are the medical officer. Yes. That does not require you to ingest unknown human substances. That is precisely why I am qualified to. She tried it, paused, sharp. Good sharp or medical sharp? Good. Thesk declined. I said, coward. I have eaten volcanic root insects. That sounds like something somebody says when they don't want mustard. I checked the time. The recital had started. I sighed. Thesk noticed. The musical event. Clarinet. What is a clarinet? I was tired enough to answer honestly. Pressure-driven acoustic tube with keys. He went still. You have recreational plumbing. I stared at him, then laughed so hard I had to set the sandwich down. Ilieth laughed too. Thesk looked pleased with himself in a way I had not seen before. You made a joke. I described your instrument. That was a joke. Then your species has designed an accidental joke. The alarm cut us off. The projected environmental margin had fallen below 90 minutes. Humor ended. Work came back. Manual. We had two choices. Keep isolating one branch at a time. Safer, too slow, or unwind the adaptive states manually. Fast, risky. The quiet geometry had not been operated that way in its entire service life. Captain Oren came to engineering. Thesk gave him the options. Oren asked me, which do you recommend? Manual reset. Probability of line rupture. Depends how well your people follow sequence. Thesk said, that is not a probability. Oren glanced at him. She has explained her position on false numbers. I liked him more every hour. I could not physically reach every valve. Some service spaces were built for Seydrin bodies. One branch passed through a compartment with atmospheric composition I could tolerate for less than 3 minutes. Another was in a gravity orientation that turned my inner ear into a formal complaint. So the Seydrin crew would do most of the actual valve work. That mattered. I was not going to save their ship by running around while advanced aliens watched. The ship was theirs. My job was to teach them how to think about a dirty system. I divided the network into teams. Each team got local gauges. Each team also got printed sequence backups in case the central system changed its display logic. They had manual checkoffs as well. I heard Thesk ask why humans printed emergency sequences instead of trusting redundant digital systems. I said, because paper does not reboot. He considered that acceptable. That might have been the highest compliment he gave all night. I addressed the teams. Do not stare at the master schematic. Watch what your valve is actually doing. Pressure before, pressure after, temperature, flow. If something changes that you did not expect, call it immediately. One engineer asked, even if the central control system labels the change normal. Especially then, Thesk said, the schematic is continuously updated. I looked at him, then why are we here? He gave me a very human expression, annoyance at being caught by a sentence he had already learned. The reset began, valve 3 closed, pump 2 reduced, thermal branch 6 opened, sanitation bypass 12 isolated, pressure fell, held. Recovered, habitat temperatures stabilized, medical load dropped. Captain Oren restored partial propulsion cooling. For 8 minutes it worked beautifully, too beautifully. I heard the knock before the alarm, one hard pulse through a conduit below engineering. My head turned. Stop. Thesk checked the display. Pressure is normalizing in Sector 7. Too fast. A flexible expansion chamber in the environmental branch began swelling. It had been starved for months. Full flow hit weakened material. The chamber wall bulged. Thesk said, if we close upstream, pressure rebounds into habitat 4. Don't close it. The chamber will rupture. Where's your emergency drain? He pulled the map. Maintenance manifold, capacity insufficient. For continuous flow. Yes. I don't need continuous. I pointed. Open the drain, close downstream halfway, not full, vent the high point. Thesk looked at me. That will create a transient oscillation. Yes. Potentially unstable. Yes. That is inelegant. I'm not decorating it. He issued the orders: drain open, half isolation, vent, pump pulse. The chamber expanded another centimeter, then collapsed inward. Pressure dumped through the maintenance manifold in a short, violent surge. The drain system screamed, not literally. Pipes make noises when reminded of their purpose. Then the pressure settled. The chamber held. Thesk stared at the live graph. I breathed again. He said, "That should not have worked." It worked exactly why it should have. The drain capacity was too small for steady state. We didn't give it steady state. He recalculated, then nodded once. No praise, no astonishment, just incorporation. That was when I knew I had him. Turned the computer off. The cross-connection membrane failed 6 minutes later. Completely. Ilieth saw contamination spike. Thesk saw pressure changes. I saw the automation respond. It began reopening branches we had just isolated. Of course it did. Its highest priority was maintaining delivered flow. It had no concept that its previous solutions were the problem. "Stop automatic balancing," I said. Thesk's hands moved. The system rejected the command. "Emergency stabilization has priority." "Turn it off." He looked at me. "All fluid network automation." "Yes." Captain Oren came onto the channel. "Explain." Thesk did. Oren asked, "Can your crew operate the vessel without it?" I answered before Thesk could. "Your crew can." Thesk looked at me. I continued, "They know the sequence now." That was the moment, not the final valve, not the tool work. This, trust, because I could not reach every branch, because I did not understand every Seydrin material, because Ilieth knew the biological limits better than I ever would, because Thesk could calculate stress propagation faster than I could read the screen. I was the plumber, they were the ship. Thesk said, "Disable automation." The network went manual. The quiet geometry's beautiful self-balancing map froze. For the first time, every valve state reflected only what a living person had actually commanded. Pressure immediately began drifting. Team 4, close 2%. Team 7, hold. Medical branch. Ilieth answered, "We can tolerate 7 additional minutes at current contamination." Captain Oren cut cooling to an unused survey laboratory. That bought 5. Thesk caught a pressure rise on a branch behind me. Backflow on thermal 8. I turned. He was already ordering the valve closed, not because the central system told him. Because pressure after the valve rose before pressure ahead of it. He had learned. Good catch. I watched the gauge. I smiled. He did not. We were past jokes. The projected environmental margin stabilized at 22 minutes. Then the final isolation valve refused to close. ITS still a valve. The valve sat inside a service bay behind the main heat recovery manifold. If it stayed open, contaminated flow kept crossing into the environmental loop. Replace it, 3 hours. We had 20 minutes. Thesk issued the close command manually. Actuator moved. Valve position reported 71%. Stopped. He tried reverse. Nothing. Again, nothing. "Scale in the stem," I said. Thesk looked at the diagnostic. "The actuator torque is at maximum." "Can I reach it?" He hesitated. "Yes." "Let's go." The service bay was barely wide enough for me. Thesk came with me. Good. I was exhausted. He knew the system and I knew the failure. The actuator housing was gorgeous, sealed, self-calibrating, magnetic. Completely useless once the stem beneath it stopped moving. We depressurized the branch as far as we safely could. We could not take it to 0. Ilieth told us the contamination margin was down to 11 minutes. The actuator had to come off. Thesk released the field locks. I braced. The housing shifted, heavy. We lowered it onto the service shelf. Underneath the housing there was nothing exotic left. A shaft, a stem, a seat, and mineral scale packed around the upper stem seal. Mineral scale packed around the upper stem seal. There was no alien elegance left. It was just a valve. I laughed once. Thesk looked at me. "What?" "Nothing. It is clearly something. It's still a valve. Obviously. You wouldn't understand." He almost smiled. We connected the manual torque adapter, the one with wrench flats, the version I had made him redesign. I seated my tool. Thesk watched. Apply heat. Controlled 2 degrees at a time, not the stem, housing. He did. Expansion changed the fit. I leaned into the torque bar. Nothing. We relieved another fraction of upstream pressure. I tried again. The stem moved maybe 0.5 millimeter. Thesk said, "Movement." I felt it. Another heat step, another pressure adjustment. I worked the stem backward a fraction, then forward, not forcing, breaking scale loose. There is a difference between strength and leverage. There is also a difference between leverage and knowing when the thing you are leaning on is about to become expensive. I stopped. Thesk asked, why? Seat resistance changed. He checked. Correct. More pressure relief. We will lose thermal margin. How much? 3 minutes. Do it. Captain Oren authorized. Pressure dropped. I reset the tool, pulled. The stem moved 1 millimeter, then 3, scale cracked audibly. Thesk got his hands on the secondary bar. Together we worked it. Close, pause, back, close, pressure changed. Ilieth called out that we had 6 minutes left. The valve reached 82%. Then 90. The stem jammed again. Thesk said, torque limit. Not ours. Structural limit. That mattered. I stopped, thought. The scale had packed unevenly. If we kept closing, we risked bending the stem. Reverse 1 degree. Thesk looked at me. We need closed. I know. We backed it slightly. A fragment of black mineral scale pushed out around the seal. I hooked it with a pick. Another fragment, then another. Now. We pulled, the valve closed. It did not close dramatically. There was no explosion and no cinematic light, just a mechanical stop. Thesk looked at the local gauge. Pressure before valve held. Pressure after valve fell. Clean separation. On the comm, environmental engineering began shouting status updates. Contamination stopped rising. Thermal load stabilized. Habitat temperatures began recovering. Ilieth said medical exposure declining. Captain Oren restored cooling. The quiet geometry lived. I sat down on the service floor. Thesk sat beside me. For about 10 seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at the wrench flats on the adapter. I dislike that you were correct about these. Put that in the report. I will not. You're learning. A lot. We spent another 3 hours putting the ship into a stable configuration. It was not the original configuration. It was stable, and there is a difference. Some branches stayed isolated. Some systems ran below ideal efficiency. One habitat shifted its temperature by 2 degrees. The survey laboratory remained offline, but the ship was safe. I finally got back to engineering control with grease on one sleeve, alien mineral dust on both hands, and the beginning of a headache that could have filed for residency. Thesk handed me water, human water. I checked the label. He noticed. That is insulting. I'm being careful. Ilieth brought me food that looked like a translucent brick. I asked what it was. She said, nutritionally adequate. I ate my own emergency protein bar. Thesk watched the environmental network settle. Then he asked, how many humans can do what you just did? I thought he meant the quiet geometry. On this ship, me now, give my crew a day and probably most of them. No. He turned toward me. How many humans are trained to maintain fluid systems after documentation no longer reflects actual configuration? Access is constrained, components are degraded, contamination is present, and failure is already underway. That was a better question. I thought about Devlin, my first municipal foreman, boiler techs. Pipefitters, wastewater operators, HVAC crews, marine engineers, hospital maintenance. People crawling into service spaces under cities at 3 in the morning because somebody's main had failed. People keeping hospitals warm, water clean, waste moving away from where humans sleep. People nobody thinks about until something stops working. A lot, I said. Thesk's face changed. It was not shock. It was calculation, scale. That profession is common. Plumbing. Yes. Very. Your civilizations train large numbers of specialists to manage degraded fluid infrastructure. Among other things. He looked back at the ship. I did not explain further, didn't need to. The quiet geometry was alive. The valve was closed. The crew had run their own ship manually. The point was already sitting in front of him. That sounds expensive. The quiet geometry stayed docked for 12 days. Seydrin engineers replaced the damaged membrane. Removed mineral deposits. Rebuilt 2 thermal branches. They did not tear out their automation and copy human plumbing. That would have been stupid. Their system was excellent. They changed what happened when excellence failed. New service ports appeared, mechanical cleanouts, manual isolation points, physical valve state indicators, pressure test fittings, bypass labels, temporary state documentation, wrench flats, lots of wrench flats. Thesk showed me the translator update before departure. The old translation for plumber had apparently been domestic liquid conduit repair laborer. I laughed for almost a minute. That is technically accurate in the same way local combustion enthusiast describes a rocket engineer. Thesk looked offended on behalf of translation science. The revised definition was applied fluid systems maintenance specialist responsible for pressure, flow, environmental infrastructure, sanitation, thermal service, and emergency restoration. I read it twice. That sounds expensive. You are expensive. Good. We're learning. He actually laughed. It was not much, but it was enough. Recreational plumbing. I missed the recital, most of it. Tessa sent me a message containing only. Again, I deserved that. I called her. She answered with, someone better have been actively dying. Technically, several hundred people were at risk. That is annoyingly valid. I have the recording. You are watching all of it. Yes. No skipping the third movement. There are movements. She hung up. Thesk found me later in the docking lounge watching the recital. He sat beside me without asking. The clarinet ensemble reached a complicated section. Tessa played well. I knew enough about clarinet to know that because she had informed me of this in advance. Thesk listened. After several minutes, he said, the pressure control is inconsistent. I looked at him. He added, I believe that is intentional. You're learning diplomacy too. He watched the rest, did not interrupt. Afterward, he said, your niece performed adequately. That is the rudest possible compliment. I believed humans valued direct assessment. Not about children's music. I will update my model. Good. Where does it go? Before the quiet geometry departed, Thesk insisted on showing me the refitted maintenance deck. I knew what that meant. Engineers love showing you things they changed after insisting the change was unnecessary. The new access panel opened without tools, already promising. Behind it sat a manual isolation valve. Clearly labeled, physical position indicator, test port upstream, test port downstream. I nodded. Thesk waited. I could tell he expected praise. I asked, and where does it go when it goes wrong? He pointed. Pressure relief routes to the secondary capture manifold. Bypass isolation is manual here. Drain path is physically separate from environmental recovery. The capture tank has direct visual level indication and independent overflow. I looked at him, he looked back. There was no smile, then I nodded. Now you're thinking like a plumber. Thesk folded his arms. I remain a systems architect. Sure. The distinction matters. Of course. You are being deliberately irritating. Yes. He gave that low Seydrin laugh. Then the quiet geometry undocked. Port Meridian traffic control cleared her into open space. Her thermal loops held. Her environmental network held. Her pumps settled into normal load. And for the first time in 63 years, somewhere behind 3 new access panels, the ship carried cleanouts nobody expected to use. Which meant somebody had finally planned properly.